on, so I'm sure he'll show up in a minute. So let's call this meeting of the Finance Committee to order. Bob, do you have any minutes from past meetings?
Nope.
Okay, good. All right. I thought it was a very good meeting last night. It took such a long time to get everybody together, but we finally did. And got all the basics done. We want to spend some time tonight and put together some questions. What kinds of things are we interested in knowing about the school budget and about the school operations? I myself was not completely at ease with the information we were given on number of students in school choice, the number of students in the classrooms, the number of classrooms. And so I would like to ask the question if we could have kind of a counting of, for example, in East Middle School and then for the junior senior high school, what's the total number of students? What are the, how many school choice students are there? How many of the ELL students are there? And ELL, I think you understand that ELL students are school choice students. If they're from outside if they're from outside Granby, then they're classified as primarily as school choice students. But if they have the English as a second language component to them, then they get put into that category too, but that doesn't affect the overall count. Is that your understanding?
How does that affect the cost? Does it matter to us?
I think we ought to ask that again. I thought that there may have been an extra cost component for the ELL students, but I don't know that for certain. Remember, there was an explanation that for the everyday transfer student, there's a fixed cost by the state of around $5,000, but that there are a lot of students with some other circumstance around them that get an extra stipend. And I don't know if the EL students are in that category.
Well, they can't ask. So it's just kind of a potluck thing. If you take in students, you get what you get, right?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think you can't ask certain kinds of questions. My understanding was about which students you're accepting, but the state knows what their circumstance is. So for example, if a student who has special needs gets transferred on in, if you accept them as a school choice student, I think then the state then says, well, they're not only a school choice student, they're a special needs student. So
that's after you accept them.
That's after you accept them.
Right. So how does that help us?
How does that help us?
Right. I mean, if you're going to bring in so many school choice, you don't know what you're going to get. So
right.
You just decide you're taking them and you get what you get. It could be a 5,000 or it could be whatever, and then you get some more reimbursement for them, right?
Right, but the question still is, are we getting, or what kind of monetary compensation are we getting for educating different classes of students? If it should be able to be worked out. If you had an entire class full of EL students, I'm sure the financial prospects would be different than if you had a mixture. And it doesn't sound like there were that many. I thought the count was, that there were maybe, I've got a 29 count and I got a 30 count. So I'm not exactly positive which one was the right count for the EL students.
Well, there's two teachers for that program. And one of them acts as, I don't know, the administrative individual. So that one is a full teacher and the other one is part teacher and part administrator.
Wasn't one in each school too?
There's a different, yeah, there's one in each building, yeah.
Right.
And one of them is being hired to accommodate because we have 27 English as a second language number of students that we have to accommodate. So,
When
yeah,
you
I
say,
mean, I'd like to know, I mean, I would say that there's got to be a record so that where we have some of these special kids or special ed kids, and we were talking yesterday about their costs beyond a certain point, the state makes that up. The question is, I guess the question always comes back to, it's sort of like medical bills, okay? The $13,433 per pupil spending is just a number we created from the budget. We said, here's X number of students, here's the total budget, and we do a calculation. The question that we sort of have to get at on the school choice, as far as I'm concerned, is, you know, certainly the special ed thing to me is always a real problem, because I don't care what we're doing, that's a bigger cost. You know, that's always a bigger cost.
So you could
Go
look
ahead.
backwards. You could look backwards and say, of the school choice come in, how many were, you know, what was the reimbursement and how much were we short? But going forward, I mean, it doesn't help you unless.
Well, it only helps you if the same students that were in the system the previous year are exactly the same students again, because then we know. But yes, if we looked at that going backwards, I guess the real argument is because they're saying, oh, we can max out at 25. And I don't believe in, to me, part of the sales thing for Granby was, hey, small class sizes. You get the personal attention. That makes a difference in education. And so then we're saying, oh, well, the state number says the maximum optimum number, whatever, is 25. Well, we never used to operate on that. So they're trying to fill out those things to make up a budget number, you know. But the real question becomes, I mean, what are we spending, or how do we really do the calculation? And as you said last night, Scott, you know, should it be a 1-for-1? And if it's 1-for-1, it then needs to become 1-for-1 based on the classification of special ed with the extra money if you're trying to do a trade-off. So while I think that's sort of a good idea, if we look at this trend sheet that we saw, I mean, I don't see how we get to 152 students no matter what they want to do. The highest number we've ever had was 140 in FY12, and I have no idea why they did that. So I sort of come back to the point is, do the numbers really work, or is my gut feel that, hey, choice always costs us more money, it's just a hidden cost, you know, or is what my belief is when I look at the numbers just a fallacy and there's a different way to look at it?
but try to isolate one thing. I think a good question to ask is whether or not the additional money spent above the $5,000 spent for or given to us for the special ed kids, is that fully cover the cost of educating those kids, or the special ed component of costing them? Obviously, if we're dealing with a $13,000 average cost on all students, and we're getting 5, we're $8,000 short, with the exception that transportation is not transportation is involved one way or the other in the calculation, I don't think, of the average cost. But in any event, if we take in a special ed kid, are we coming out worse or the same as we would if they were just a plain choice kid? That makes sense?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, I think so. And we should phrase the question because we really would like to hear the answer. But what I thought I heard last night was that if a school choice kid is a special education needs kid, then whatever the extra amount is to pay for the special education is funded separately by the sending town. And I thought that's what was said, but that should be clarified.
Well,
Yes,
That
that
was, John, that's what was said. But, you know, in the end, the average is $6,000, right, that we get. And you can't turn on or turn off based on their needs. So I think the average is really tells us everything we need to know about school choice and the impact on the budget.
There's a separate item, which I think is the circuit breaker item.
yes.
And so I don't know whether or not the money for a school choice student who has special ed needs, if the extra money comes in through the school choice fund or whether it comes in through the other fund. That
no,
would be
it does not come in through the circuit breaker.
it does not come in through.
No, I went through the numbers and multiplied out the special ed kids that were coming from the various towns, and it comes out pretty close to the ones that have a special ed kid. Then there's the additional money coming in relates to just the special ed kid.
So,
Yeah,
One
yeah,
question.
but I thought he said it was, last night, I heard he said it was tied to the circuit breaker. And looking at the little spreadsheet that you sent me, Bob, that's $375,605. So that's a significant amount of money. And they must, in accounting, Adam must be able to basically tie that back to X number of students.
He does, but
Because-
it's not the school choice kids. And it's not paid
Well,
enough.
no, it's not
Hey.
school choice money, but all of these kids here, okay, are choice, I thought, I mean.
No, the
So
circuit
you're
breaker,
Yeah.
breaker money is a percentage of the total cost of special ed of the kids that are not school choice kids. To me,
John,
there's also a
John, this is
separate-
Adam. Can I speak just to clarify this? Do you mind?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah, let's pause here. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah. So you guys, I think it's Bob. You're right. So the circuit breaker is only for town resident kids that are our own kids in our district. So circuit breaker covers the cost above and beyond what the threshold is. The state lays out a threshold every year. I don't know it off the top of my head. It's usually around $46,000. And circuit breaker is the dollar amount of services above that amount for each of our special education students. And then they reimburse us on an average between 72 and 75% of the cost above the circuit breakers. If it's a school choice kid, there's a sheet that's called the SPED increment. So then we essentially do the same thing that we would for circuit breaker. We tally up all of those services, and whatever the cost above for a school choice student is, the sending district is responsible for sending us that money.
100%.
At 100 cents on the dollar?
Never.
Yes, for that it is. Yes, for that.
Okay.
For that, yes. The sending district doesn't send it to us. The state facilitates that process. But the cost for that student that we accept, if they have special education services, it's at the expense of the sending district.
So is that going to be part of the $692,715 in the choice column? In the spreadsheet that Bob forwarded, I'm looking at all the different categories, Title I, Title II, etc. So there's circuit breaker down there, but school choice is $692,715. So my question, Rich, based on what you said, is where do we find the sped increment that's paid by the sending town? Do we find that as part of the 692,715 in choice money, or is it someplace else like wholly?
In the choice, it's in the choice money.
Okay,
Because just if you want to do a quick calculation, take the total number of choice kids and multiply it by $5,000, and you'll see that what we're receiving is a significant amount more.
yeah, like 90,000 more roughly, would you say?
Yeah, it could be. I was going to say a little over 100, but
Okay. I don't need to calculate. Okay. So
Adam,
that's about 16, so that's about 17, 18% of the total amount of choice money we get is based on the sped increment is what your estimate is.
yeah, and actually, Adam's figure of about $6,000 a kid is about right. If it's about 100,000 and there's in round numbers 100 choice kids, that adds up to $1,000 a kid.
So I have a question.
Mhm.
Can we ask Adam to just lay out his math as to why school choice works in this budget year?
I think we'd be better off to go and think through what kinds of things we're interested in finding out. And then we'll find that out, then ask how things fit together like that. I'd rather start with some data.
Yeah, I mean, we'll end up in the same circle, John. I think, if we say the cost to educate a kid is $13,400, and we take in 119, looking at Bob's spreadsheet, and we're reimbursed, 7-11 for those kids, it tells us right off the bat it's a loser, right? So, but if there's more information that we need to know, I think that's right. So what do we need to know, though?
He knows.
Okay, I would like to know the exact amount of sped increment for all school choice students and where you would find that in the line item in the budget.
It's too many questions all at once.
It's a specific question.
Where do you find the amount? Anything that's paid to in the way of school choice money that's in excess of $5,000 per student is a special ed increment. Obviously,
I get that, but I want him to specify that. I want a number. I don't want to sit here and speculate on it. I mean, we must know how many sped students we have. If you look at the average across all of the students, okay, because there were 109 or 110, and if we average 6,000, that's 660,000. So we're close to the 692 in the choice column, okay. So you can sort of work with that number a little bit, but we're getting $1,000 more. We're getting like a 16.6% bump by taking on a sped student. And a sped student, under my impression, was always more costly to educate because of the special needs. So we're saying, oh, we're getting that. So we must know how many sped kids there are. Is it 20% of the total choice? Is it X percent? And they would know what the number is from each town that has to add in this 100% you said that they needed to do on the sped increment, So again, sped always costs us more money. If 25% of our choice students are sped students, and and we're not allowed to identify them until after the fact, well, intuitively, I'm like, hey, I have a problem with that, because that's a significant added expense for a small town budget. I don't have a problem educating those sped students, but I have a problem with the idea that it's siphoning money away from the main core of the students, because another town can just shuffle that kid over to our town and we got to pick up, you know, a significant portion of it, maybe. I don't know.
No, Joe, you're making an assumption that we aren't getting 100 cents on the dollar for the additional cost of the special ed that's a school choice kit. Adam just told us that we did get it. So consequently, and if you
guys,
look at one of the other
23. It's 23. If you use straight math and averages, 23 students out of the 119 would be some level of special ed. If you take the 5977 29, which is the 711 298 from Bob's sheet, divided by the 119, gets you to the 5977. If you then take the difference between that and 5,000, which we get, and take that difference against the 711, it would be 23 students on average. Again, we don't know that one we're getting 10,000 for and one we're getting $500 for, but on average it would come out to 23 students of the 119, or a little over 20%, would be special ed.
If you look at,
we would average
Joe,
$5,000
on the spreadsheet that I gave you, you talked about the trends. Okay, that's one of the tabs. There's a couple other tabs. All right, if you look at those, you will see how it is calculated as it comes from each town. You'll see what town has special ed kids. You'll see how many kids are coming from the town.
Yes.
And if you do the math on that, you will see that in one instance it may be $1,500, and another one it might be $15,000.
Right. So I was saying, if you use an average just to say how many of the students are there, you back into 23 is our average number of students that would have special ed if you just looked at it on averages. One point I'd like to make on your spreadsheet, Bob, and it's very good, you know, from last night's, you know, commentary in the meeting, is, you know, Granby is the 55th highest inbound town in the state out of the 360 odd cities and towns in the state. So that's pretty darn good. You know, when we talk about what we offer, clearly people come here for a reason.
Small class sizes.
Right. Something.
Yeah. Okay. So Rich, based on your number, is my assumption correct that if there's 23 of those and we averaged 1,000 for all 100 and whatever students, I'm looking at the average is $5,000 per sped student we're getting from the other town.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I know it varies, but that's the average on sped. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just trying to use averages because, you know, to get specifics is way too difficult inside of the math. So to come up with the averages, that's correct, Joe.
Okay. So that means that for a sped student, we're averaging $10,000 a student. We're getting the
Correct.
5, and then if you just break down that subgroup of sped, those 23, and we say, based on the math, it's an average of 5. 5 plus 5 is 10. So we're getting 5 for a choice students that doesn't have any special needs, and we're averaging 5 on that, or averaging 10 on the specifically the sped students only.
Yeah, correct. That's how the averages work out. So again, and only Adam, you know, can probably help us on this piece is, you know, I was playing with this some today at work while I was on a meeting, and probably should have been paying attention to that meeting rather than playing with math. But yeah, that's what we do. So I was thinking about, you know, like leverage, right? And balance in business, right? We're always trying to leverage our assets, which is our schools and our teachers, you know, the facilities and the staff. And as I thought about school choice, and I thought about it relative to the numbers we were talking about last night, I said, look, the only way you make this leverage, if you're being reimbursed on average $6,000 a student, and you have a cost of $13,400, is you would actually have to double your regular in-town student population from 706 to 1412 to take, with the same staff and same facilities,
in order to take down your average per pupil cost to about $6,000 to make this just be, flat. So to me, it again goes back to the balance of inbound and outbound and how it impacts the budget. So one of the questions I would really like, Adam to be able to come back to us with in the joint meeting is that balance, right? If we have 60 students going out, or 62.8, whatever it is in here exactly, 60 students going out and 119 coming in, for us as a town with a $13,400 per pupil cost, mathematically that has to be a loss to us. Has to be. Unless I'm missing something. And that's what I need Adam to come back and tell us.
Let me give you an example with just one class. Suppose we have a class and there are 20 Granby students in that class, and it costs the cost to educate that class is $250,000. That's what the cost of the teachers and the overhead and all the rest of stuff gets figured on in there. So you have 20 students and the cost is $250,000. So you would say that our average cost for educating those children is $12,500 each.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's take that same class and say, all right, let's bring in 5 school choice students.
Mm-hmm.
Bring in five school choice students, forgetting about the extra income, but just looking at the cost. If there's no additional cost, we have no additional administrative costs for people, we have no additional cost for a teacher, then you have 25 kids in that class, same cost as $250,000. And all of a sudden your cost per student is $10,000.
Yeah, you leverage down. Exactly. You're leveraging your fixed costs.
Right. So bringing in school choice students, unless it causes an increase in the number of classes, is a proposition which works out to your advantage. Your costs come down. Your costs go down even lower than that, actually, because you have additional income. Where the problem is that the situation can arise like it did, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, when the school committee decided to take in a certain number of extra, I think it was second graders. And as the school started, right before school started, in August, after the town meeting, but before school actually started, there were, I believe it was 8 families moved into town that had students in that grade. All of a sudden, the school department said, oh, we've got the kids we are expected to be here from town. We have the school choice students, the new school choice students we expected, plus we have an extra 8 students from Granby in that grade. We now can no longer accommodate them at our optimum class size with 2 classes. We have to go and hire another teacher and open another class. And that's what the school committee did. They did it in August. They did not ask for permission for additional money, but they came back in March and said, oh, by the way, we'd like you to give us another $80,000 because we had to hire an additional teacher and open an additional class because the situation arose where the 2 classes that we thought were going to be plenty turned out not to be plenty, and we had to add an additional teacher. That's where the problem is. It comes in a planning system which goes awry because it only focuses on some of the benefits and does not focus on the risks.
Okay, well, my question is, all of the assumptions to make the case are based on, hey, everything in education is a fixed cost because here's our budget. So it's a fixed cost, so it doesn't matter, and your math works based on not increasing the number of classes and not having to hire more labor. So it gets to that other point. But I don't know, I just find it hard to believe that there's no variable cost, that there's no incremental cost for bringing on, for each additional student. I just don't know how to quantify that. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, maybe everything, I guess it's based on your assumption, but that's the thing that, that concerns me. I recognize this balance on choice and obviously the school system generates more revenue because of choice. But the question again becomes, what's the real cost? Is
I
it-
think you're absolutely right there, Joe. But I think one of the difficulties is, even as we sit here and try to think about it, that when there suddenly becomes an incremental cost, it is very, very obvious. You have to hire a new teacher, have to open up a new classroom, and all the stuff that goes along with that. There is very obvious. It is not, at least to me, obvious what incremental costs you incur by just bringing in an additional student or two into the class. I don't know if that changes if you're talking about bringing in 10 additional students. I mean, 10 additional students is a lot.
But they did say,
Into one classroom.
they did say 80% of their cost is personnel though, right?
Right. And so, for the bulk of it, if you in fact do not need an additional teacher, do not need an additional aide, that's where the bulk of the cost comes in. And that's why if you suddenly have to add another classroom, you got a big problem. And it wipes out more than just the wipes out more than just the income of the students in that class that come for a school choice student. It's a step backwards. It's a big step backwards.
You know, I'm in my explanation with the email I sent. If the alternative to having choice is to stop it. But unfortunately, if you stop it, we're still obligated to continue to educate all kids that are currently under choice as long as they want to stay in Granby. So it means that you're not going to get any real benefits. Initially, you're probably going to end up being worse financially, and you can't do a darn thing about kids that want to opt out and go to a different school system. That's just going to be a drain
But
of
you
your
can
revenue.
balance, right, Bob? Bob, you can balance. You know, if you've got, you know, you don't have to take in more. You don't have to get out, but you don't have to take in more than you put out. I know you don't always know what's leaving, but if you're within balance of what you put out, then there is no additional expense.
Yeah, that's true. I think one of the difficult parts is that the class size that's recommended for each of the various grades is something that can be changed by vote of the school committee. And as they do that, that will affect, under the way they do their planning, it will affect the number of choice kids that can come in. And if in the event they want to shrink the class size from, we'll say 22 to 18, which is probably more than they would do, but if they were to do that, that can then throw some incremental cost in, because you've still got the school choice kids around, you still got your other kids, and you'll end up with the need for another teacher just because you made your class size smaller.
Yeah, as I think about this, it's always seemed to me that one of the difficulties every year that arises is that the assumptions that go into the educational system seem to be immovable. And it's the question I asked last night: why do we need a high school? Why should we bother with having a high school? Unless somebody takes the time, and it has to be a group of people, it has to be a group of citizens who are concerned as much about education as they are about costs, to say, what should the education system look like if you didn't start with saying, here's what we want to do. We want to have class sizes of this much. We want to have these classes offered. We want to have salaries of so-and-so. We want to have amenities of such and such. We have extracurricular activities and so-and-so. Instead of doing it that way, what if you started with an amount of money and said, here's an amount of money that you have. How would you organize a school? What would you do to run a school? And if you ran the school entirely differently, if you had a different philosophy of education around all those different pieces, then you could possibly come up, well, we almost certainly come up with a different answer, but it'd be an entirely different approach to the problem. But as long as we keep going and saying that, all right, we're going to keep all the salaries as competitive as they've been, we're going to keep all the work hours as competitive as they've been, we're going to keep everything else exactly the same, then there is no hope. There's absolutely no hope to solving this question.
So I have a question. How does, I mean, it seems to be important to have how many kids in the class, right? So how do we compare to somebody else, like Belchertown? You know, the kindergarten 1, 2, 3 is like 20 kids. Would this Belchertown 20, or are they like 30 or 25? I mean, do we really have smaller class sizes than everyone else? Is that the reason that they come to Granby?
I don't know. I've never seen figures like that. And that's exactly the sort of question, though, that I think ought to be asked, because it goes to this, the heart of this question is, what's the philosophy of education? And does the philosophy of education include deep, deep pockets by the citizens of the town?
Well, I think that's exactly right, John and Joe, is, you know, the throttle or the limiter on what allows you to leverage from school choice is the predetermined class size.
Yeah.
And look, if you could take in, if you said, look, kindergarten can be 30 kids instead of 20, and I'm not advocating for that, but if you were just to do that math and say, look, so I don't need to hire any more teachers, I'm going to go from 20 to 30, and I'm going to now bring those kids in from other areas who want a school choice in, you leverage the expense of the teacher in the classroom in a better way. When you have these limiters, and the class size is the limiter, you can't leverage the expense past a point. So when you get imbalance between the out and the in, is where you end up with the cost hitting the town.
And where you get the sudden surprises of needing extra classes. You're exactly right. Yeah.
So if the school committee voted to raise the kindergarten, first grade, and second grade to 22 instead of 20, you got what? 6 more school choice kids? I don't
Yeah,
know.
the whole balance comes to, you know, what John was talking about earlier is, you know, leveraging that 13.4 that it costs us down. And again, because we simply can't do it because of our base population and our cost per student is too high. You know, you'd have to, you know, nearly double your student population to get those two things to balance between the state reimbursement or the town-to-town reimbursement of choice students. So we couldn't get that in balance, but we certainly could get it, the per student cost down more with larger class sizes. But again, I'm not an educator, so I can only say from a financial point of view, that's how you leverage your expense.
Granby's educational position and being number 55 as an inbound destination for choice has always been driven by our small class sizes. But in order to get more money, as we've said, then they say, well, okay, the state is recommending, they recommend 20 for maximum of 20. They don't, you know, so it's sort of like our budget, John, that we always do here. Okay, well, you know, net school spending, this is what the state says, so that's what we do. And choice and class sizes are sort of the same thing. You know, they come out with a metric and they say it's this, this, and this. Yet the real reality is, if you want to look at the benefits of education in the K through 6, where we're trying to fill up, you know, more students, is exactly the area where you want fewer students. And then as the students get older, you can, education-wise, you can handle bigger class sizes, but it's that individual attention that gives those kids a benefit. So
Let me give you
sense, but anyway.
a simplified example of what school choice means. Right now, the figures that were given yesterday are that roughly 20% of our students are school choice students. Now, if you take the costs for running the entire education system, say this costs are X dollars, and you divide that by the population, or divide that by 8/10 of the population, what happens is that your cost per student for the 20% reduction in population goes up by 25% per student. And so that's what happens with a 20% reduction. Is 20 out of 80 is a quarter. So that instead of saying that our per pupil cost is $14,000 per student, what it is that if we were just paying Granby student cost. And if it's the same thing, then it wouldn't be 14,000. It would be a quarter more than 14,000
Mhm.
by having the reduction, because the same cost for 80% of the kids. So financially, if it's done cautiously and works right, school choice can in fact help you. But the question is still, all right, so we got this help and we're still up at a cost of what, $13,000, $14,000 per student? What does that look like over a period of time? How has that grown? A few years ago, we did a display for the town at the town meeting that showed that the cost for education based upon the required numbers by the state, the minimum cost, was going up a lot faster than inflation. And what it was in Granby, because of the extra money that we were pouring in, it went up even faster than that. So that's where I think you begin to say, something doesn't make sense here. It just doesn't make sense. But once you're stuck within the assumptions about the educational system, not only it's not going to make sense, it can't be fixed. All you can do is pour more money in. It either comes from the tax outside.
Do we have any at all data on other towns' cost per student? Is that something Adam would have or somebody would have? Because when I look at,
No,
I'm looking at.
It's something that is available. I mean, I looked at the,
I can sorry guys for interrupting. It's Adam. I can share that. It's a DESE published document. I can certainly share the master document, and you can go through all 350 plus towns, cities, regional districts in the Commonwealth and see exactly what their per pupil costs are.
That's interesting. And then their average class size by grade. You know, I don't know if that's available, but I'm looking at all these cities and towns, and there's many towns that are imbalanced in this, you know, and then there's some that are the opposite, right? And so when I look at these towns, you know, like the Quabbin Regional School District, right, and I look at, you know, they're the largest inbound in the state at 313 and 93 going out, right? But if their cost per student is $6,000, it's a winner for them, right? So, you know, I think that would be interesting to know so that we have some comparables to try to understand the balance piece.
I have a question. When he presented the budget, it's based on how many kids? I mean, how many of those 150? Wasn't there
712, I thought.
706.
706.
706 was the student count, and the school choice amount that was baked into the budget, according to Adam, is what is, not what would be, because we don't know what people may or may not come.
So that's a big factor in what is going to happen to the budget, right?
Oh,
Based
hell
on
yeah.
how many
Oh,
kids,
sorry.
how many-
Heck yeah.
When do they know that? When do students have to commit?
May 1st is the deadline.
May 1st?
Yeah, May 1st. And we're and again, I appreciate you guys let me hop on when I can speak. I appreciate it. So what we're trying to do, obviously we understand the concerns and all that. So what we're doing is we're following up with as many of our school choice families that are coming into the district. We're following up with as many of them as possible to see if because they still can apply every year. So even if they've been here for 5 or 6 years, at the end of each year or the beginning of the following year, they have to essentially apply. We hold the spot, but there's an application process they have to go through so that we hold the spot for them. So what we're in the process of doing is getting in touch with most of those families to see, hey, like, are you guys planning on coming back? What are you, what are your plans for the fall, so we can try to leverage as much information as possible surrounding school choice. So we're in the middle of that. The deadline application is May 1st, so we're going to work up until May 1st to try to get as much feedback as possible.
Does that date actually impact like the homeschool kids too? Do they have to decide?
That's a good question. I don't know, so I can certainly find that answer out for you. I don't know about the homeschool, but I could get that answer for you.
Do you see the COVID thing going kind of sliding off a little bit and getting back into going to school?
So again, and I'm obviously all you guys know this. It's certainly been an outlier of a year. So I wish I could say, yeah, like we're going to be back in school in the fall. I mean, there's still no guidance from DESE on how we should implement getting high school back, right? Like they came back K-5 or elementary, like we want everyone back April 5th, and then we'll give you subsequent guidance on high school. And we've yet to hear that. Now Granby's trying to do their own thing and get most of our high school kids back, but there's so much unknown for the remainder of this year to even speculate what the fall is going to look like. It would just be somewhat irresponsible on our part. I know that's probably not what you want to hear, but we really don't know what the fall is going to look like because we don't know how the rest of this year is going to look like with only 8 to 10 weeks left of school.
Adam, if you can give us a definitive answer to that question, we'll see to it that you're a star witness in a number of congressional committees.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yep, exactly. Yep. How about if I get you that answer, you guys can just solve our deficit for us and we'll all be happy.
Okay, I'll buy the lottery ticket for Friday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, I wish we could answer that, but we don't. And I'm trying to be, I get the whole school choice. I don't want to call it an argument. I think it's a good conversation. And I think last night it might have got out a little hand. There was too many probably people chiming in. It's certainly a good conversation. I try to, with the revenue, at least be somewhat conservative with how we budget potential revenue and trying to budget revenue based on just filling the seats of the outgoing graduating class. Now, certainly I could, we could up that projection by 10 or 15 students, but just coming off a year like this with so many kids homeschooling or kids leaving the district because we weren't in person and they wanted to go to a district that was in person, the potential of those kids coming back, we still just don't know what that impact is yet. So we're trying to be as conservative as possible. But we certainly know, there's going to be an impact, one way or the other. We could find out in 6 weeks from now, like we might get 30 of those school choice kids back. We don't know. So I'm trying to stay conservative with it. I know that's not the answer you guys are looking for, but this year, coming off a year like this and not knowing what the fall is going to look like is just really, really tough. Obviously not for the school, for the town, for everybody. So it's just tough, and we're trying to stay as conservative as possible, right now.
So what is the school committee's current plan to be live? And by May 1st, is that gonna, maybe change?
So what, I'm sorry, what did you say? What's the school committee's plan to do what?
To be live,
To be in person.
back to school.
So right now we're trying by April. I don't know what the date is. I sometimes get lost in the conversation, those school committee meetings and all the times we're trying to bring kids back. But I want to say by the end of April, we're trying to have most of the high school back. I can get that for you. Now we have most of the middle high school back. We have, I want to say, out of 300 plus kids, I want to say we got close to 260 or 270 back into the middle school and high school. So we're not far off. We're almost there. So if everything stayed how it is now, and we don't get another wave or anything come the summer and the fall, like I could see us being fully back. My personal opinion, I could see us being fully back into schools in September.
So the thing you were going to try to look up for us is the homeschool piece and when they might have to decide on that?
Yeah, so that's a piece I don't know. Yep, I will certainly get that information, see if there is a deadline. I'm sure there is. I just don't know what it is. So I will try to get that to you guys to see when that deadline is.
Okay, John had spurred a thought of mine. What would be interesting for me is, like when you look at business things and they have these different tables and codes, and so if we take the 13,433 per pupil expenditure amount, the way you derive that calculation, can we break that down by every component that generates us revenue to show us where that is? Because maybe that's the way I feel better about the fact that perhaps choice is really a fixed cost issue which has no or little impact, or where is that big differential? Because maybe I'm missing something on the school bus thing, because if we have this many more students, then our transportation costs would be 900 and 100,000 more than what it currently is in the budget. So to me, if I could understand that, then that would help me get to what Rich is driving at, which is, what is the optimum range, because once you hire another teacher, you want to keep that person. We don't want to have to go back and start pink slipping every year that, and then make a decision at the last minute to either hire them back or not hire them back. So anyway.
I don't think of it as a per pupil cost question yet. I think of it as total dollar amount. With the total dollar amount that it's going to cost for the education plan, you then figure into that how many students you're going to have, and that's a combination of school choice students and town students, and you figure out where your income is going to come from. And right now, the situation is that the school has presented a budget. They've got their fixed cost for next year for education. And according to the way it was presented to us, that fixed cost is not going to change no matter how many students there are. That's what their fixed cost of education is. What they want to know is, how do they get the money for that fixed cost if the town wants to allow them to get money. And there the choices are, how much taxes we're going to put into it, how much income comes in from various sources. We're going to raise taxes to fund this, or how much comes in from school choice. What are those different sources? All of that then will lead you to an ultimate calculation of cost per pupil. But in one way, that's sort of artificial for what our problem is. Our problem is, how do we match up the expenses with the income? And the big gap now is there, with the 700,000 or whatever it is. The question has to become, is that gap going to be met by an increase in income or a decrease in expenses? And the school has been very reluctant to decrease expenses, because about the only way to decrease expenses is to decrease the cost of personnel, including extracurricular activities. You either have larger classrooms, or you get rid of athletics, or some other options, none of which seem palatable, because the whole philosophy of the education system is set, and we're not allowed to touch with that. Adam, would it be possible for you to get information on how many classes are taught? I don't mean class by 8th grade, 9th grade, 12th grade. I mean, how many individual classes are there in the school year, and how many students are in each class? For example, I mean, we hear stories of some classes being offered with 1, 2, 3 students, 4 students. The 20 would be a goal which is almost unattainable for some of the courses, is my understanding. But we don't really know what the figures are for that. So it's very hard to comment on anything that the school department likes to think of as being their purview only. But I think because of this huge amount of monetary difference, and if long run, this is what the operating philosophy is going to be, then we all know the only way for raising long run money is to increase taxes. And so we think it would be important for us to be able to offer some comments for people to think about on these class sizes that exist in some places. Is that possible to get class size information?
Yep, I can certainly do that. All that I would ask is if maybe you just include that in the list of questions that you guys come up with tonight, and I will certainly myself or whoever will get that information to you guys.
Yeah, we'll try to phrase all these questions in a reasonable fashion so they're understandable and answerable.
Okay. Yes, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
So I have a question, John, I guess. If all the homeschool kids came back, how much would what's the financial impact to the school?
Well, a question that we'd have to answer there is not just on the raw income that would come by them being figured back into the count, but would there be so many that would come back that the school would say, oh, now we got we have to add an extra class. So it's more than just an income question. It's an income question.
But you can't.
So can I just
not let them back?
Again, so can I want to clarify, and I think we spoke about this last night, and again there was a lot going on last night, so it might have gotten lost. But when we decided how many school choice kids we were going to accept, we made the assumption that all of the homeschool kids were going to come back. So the school choice seats that were open, we're assuming all of our Granby residents would be obviously educated first, and then we would have school choice seats. To the cost, the problem with that is the Chapter 70 revenue is always a year behind. So we can get all those kids back next year. And when we submit our data on October 1 to the state, which is how our Chapter 70 revenue is based on our October 1 enrollment, as many kids as we have in the district, hometown students, as many as we have in the district on October 1, that's how we will get funded a year from now. So we're always a year behind enrollment wise to Chapter 70 revenue wise.
So there's no current adjustment. It's always a year lag on adjustment.
We can certainly, the other thing with enrollment, we got kids coming in and coming out. So that's a moving target on a monthly basis. So it's really hard for us to kind of, drill into a cost, because our enrollment is, might not be a lot, but it's constantly fluctuating. So it's always, that revenue is always based on the year prior's enrollment, the October 1 prior enrollment. That's what our revenue is based on.
So you're not going to be hurt by the homeschool kids till next year? The reduction?
So it depends, right? Because for October 1 of 2020, so if we had a lot of homeschool kids that are homeschooling in this current fiscal year, wherever they were on October 1 of 2020, it would be reflected in the Chapter 70 revenue that we're looking at right now for the FY22 budget.
Okay.
If we get all of those kids back, we wouldn't get that money until a year from now. We would see that revenue next year.
So I guess that's not a helper. That doesn't help us this year.
Not right now. It's not. No, not for in real time. No, it doesn't help us. No.
The effect of the following year is an increase in income in Chapter 70 money, but it'll also then be, I assume, an increase in the minimum net school spending, because it would actually be an addition of students. Is that correct?
Yeah, and you know, obviously you guys know part of that net school spending has to do with the required local contribution, which has to do with census data. With, you know, there's a town aspect to that too. But essentially, yes, the net school spending total would probably increase. Correct.
That's a real increase in money that would be needed. You know, if you just look at the figures here, you see that from the whatever the figures were, the $10 million for the school costs, there's 4 million coming from, 4.5 million coming from Chapter 70 revenue out of a total school budget of 8 million. So that you would expect that same kind of situation to exist. That as much as we get additional income in Chapter 70 from the state, we'd have to come up with an additional amount of income from the town to educate students.
And you know, based on that in-kind sheet, I mean, a big driving cost in a lot of the increases is health insurance. I mean, what the town pays for at least school department health insurance has gone up close to $500,000 over the last 2 or 3 years. And you know, that's, I don't want to say it's out of our control, but that's, you know, that's one of those costs that we really don't have any control over.
All right, so we're looking for information on counts on number of students and grades. We're looking for information on how it relates to the different categories of students, school choice in and out, charter school out. We're looking for information on class sizes. Want some information on particularly what the expectation is for if additional school choice students are taken on. What is the risk that in 1 or 2 years we're going to have to increase the number of classes? Is that the sort of thing that we're looking for, that you've heard, gentlemen?
Yeah. I would say, John.
Yeah.
When you're doing class size, it might be helpful if we knew how many kids were choice as against local kids.
Yeah, for everybody in how many 6th grade classes are there? And in that class, how many of those 6th graders are town students? How many are school choice students?
Yeah.
Are you trying to forecast out the future cost, or John, or are you trying to come up with a perspective on kind of like, how would you manage the flow over time to balance? What's the impetus for the question?
The impetus is that would like to have that be something that the school committee is aware of when they're making a choice for how many school choice students to bring in, how many additional school choice students to bring in. They've already figured in, according to Adam, they've already figured in that there's a possibility that all the homeschool kids might show up in class. But there's also the possibility that if additional students move into town, you don't want to be right up against the limit in your class size and feel like you have to then increase the number of classes, add another teacher in another class because of a sudden influx like happened a few years ago. So I want to get a sense for us and for us to be able to talk to them when they're thinking about bringing in school choice students of how close they are to these edges of what could be a precipitous increase in cost.
Okay.
So
that's what I was trying to get to, is forecasting future costs.
Yeah.
I believe last night, one of the school committee members started quoting from I'm going to say a spreadsheet or a chart, whatever, as to how they came upon the number of kids that they were willing to bring in. And that might be helpful to get the logic that they were using.
Yes, I was kind of getting at that by this sort of sense of how big are the classes, how many classes, how big are they, how many are school choice, how many are students, and sort of what is the school's idea of optimum class size for that grade. I'd like to bring a little bit more of this mathematical financial view into seeing what's going on. And again, my position is that the theory of school choice is fine. I have no problem at all with the theory of school choice, but it's got to be done in such a way that you don't risk other things.
Well, there's the philosophical question, John. If you think about the school without school choice, and you think about the ebbs and flows in student population, that you might arrive at a place where you didn't have a high school sooner because your population reaches, such a small level that it wouldn't make financial sense to have it. So, the question I was asking myself, and again, it's philosophical, is it good? Is it just masking a future problem, or is it perhaps helping us get to a better place where our population increases, and then you need to rely less on it? So I was thinking through that today, and I don't know the answer to that.
You're right. Well, I think though, unless this becomes part of the consciousness of the town to think about these things, the path we're on over the long run, I just don't see how it's sustainable without an increase in taxes. And I don't think that we want to increase taxes. I don't think there's a need for it.
I also don't think there's an appetite for it, John, especially considering the times we live in and the impact that COVID's had on people's incomes and, mental, state. I'm not sure there's a heck of an appetite for any type of tax increase. So, I'm not sure that would get anywhere anyways.
Last fall it was over 20% unemployment in Granby. It takes a long time to recover from. So,
Yeah, sure does.
yeah. Well, listen, I would suggest then we do the following. I want to volunteer Bob to work
Poor
with
Bob.
me on putting together in some kind of order, or readable order, what kinds of questions we've been asking here as it comes out of this discussion. I mean, the questions are all there. It's a matter of writing them up.
When I volunteered to be clerk many years ago, it was only to take minutes, and they're very short.
Yeah, but I thought John wrote down my very intricate question in detail. I saw him furiously writing there, so.
He's a good note taker. He's a good note taker, so maybe I could put it down in nice detail after he furnishes me all the detail.
Okay. So.
Hey guys, it's Adam. I just have a couple. I just wanted to update you on a couple things. So, for homeschool students, there is no deadline for them to let us know when or if they plan on coming back. So for homeschool, there's no deadline. For current school choice kids that are already with us, their deadline to notify us that they're going to come is May 1st. But there is no deadline, obviously, for any new school choice kids to come to the district.
In other words, on May 1st, you'll know they have the answer on roughly 100 of the kids, and it's pot luck on whatever.
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of that. What was that? Sorry.
As of May 1st, you'll know for sure what the status is of roughly 100 of the school choice kids.
Exactly. Yep. Hopefully everyone left the graduating class. Correct. Yep.
And you'll probably at the same moment in time know about the 60 kids going out.
So that's another good question, and I think that yes. So they would obviously have to let their district that they're attending know And I'm not sure, obviously, when we would be notified of that. That's a good question. I will get the answer and follow up with you.
And then it's potluck on the new ones that you would propose taking in.
Well, that's a proposal, right? So, again,
It may be
I don't know if that's
September.
in stone or what,
September
Bob.
5th.
I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure yet that it's a smart thing to do. It all depends on your, the ins and outs. That's what I'm struggling with, is that piece, to take in another 50.
My thought only, you can't, since you don't have any way of knowing, there's no way that you can utilize any 5,000 for any one of those kids in this year's budget. If it comes in, it would be gravy, assuming that it would be additional revenue. We won't say gravy, additional revenue, but it can't be part of the projected budget at this stage of the game.
Yeah, I mean, look, if those 50, I think there was approximately 50 additional kids that they opened positions for or made available slots for, all came in, and we didn't spend one more incremental dollar associated with, the facilities or teachers or anything. Yeah, that would, 50 times, 6,000, that's going to cover, $300,000 of the gap, right?
But
If you don't spend one more
dollar. At this point in time, we can't use it. So
Right.
that we still have the gap is unchanged regardless of whether we get any new kids or not.
Right. But if you get all 50, that closes your gap from the 727, drops it, 300,000. Now you're talking
No, it doesn't.
427.
It doesn't
If you don't
drop the
spend
gap.
another dollar, it does.
No, it can't drop the gap from this year because they've got to have a school budget. Town's got to have a budget approved. So the budget's going to get approved without the benefit of any revenue from the additional school choice kids. If it does come in, the school department would have an additional $250,000 available for whatever.
But the school committee is going to vote on a budget. It's not a budget, like John said, till it goes through town, right?
You know, I'm talking town. The town is going to vote June 5th or whatever the date is that they picked. And that budget the projected balancing of it cannot involve any revenue from the additional kids. I mean, I say it can't, obviously it could, but the reality is that it's not guaranteed. And then if the kids don't materialize, then you're looking at having an operating deficit next year.
Oh no, I agree with that. It's a wishful, position that 50 would take the seats. Again, Adam would know on May 1st they have to commit by that date. If they commit by that date, the school committee then approves a budget. When was your budget meeting, Adam? I forget.
Well, we're going to present on April 20th. That's our next scheduled school committee meeting. And again, I know, unfortunately, we have a deadline of May 1st that, essentially it could be any number, but we have to have an adopted number by May 1st. I have to get it approved by school committee, do a public hearing, all that. On top of that, the problem is we also have the school committee in the middle of a superintendent search. So our time is really, really kind of spread thin right now. And it looks like the 20th is really the only next time we'd be able to get together to present the budget and hopefully get it approved. So
Adam, what happens if the town doesn't do anything between now and May 1st to help you? Do you have to present a balanced budget?
I mean, well, yeah, obviously the most ideal thing would be to present a balanced budget. But essentially, I don't, it's not going to sound reckless, but essentially on May 1st, the school committee can approve everything. But like John says, and like we get back to the idea that it doesn't matter what the finance committee says or what Chris says, it depends on what the town votes. So, I mean, it's just a formality for May 1st. It's just something that Mass General Law says schools have to abide by. But if it's not balanced, I mean, we could present an amended budget on town meeting floor. It's just essentially a formality and a deadline that we have to follow. What the budget is, it doesn't necessarily have to be balanced at that point. Obviously, ideally, we'd like it to be, but it doesn't have to be.
John,
I have a little different.
I need to interrupt. John, I have to go. My wife had knee surgery this afternoon.
Oh,
I'm like an hour beyond when I should have called her back.
Okay.
So
okay. That's
my
fine.
daughter just signaled me, so I have to go for tonight. Okay.
Okay. Thank you for attending.
Okay. Thank you, Joe.
We'll be in touch.
The take I have is that the school committee can approve any budget they want because all they're doing is approving a spending plan. They aren't doing anything about the actual funding of that plan. So if they want to present a budget to the finance committee that shows a deficit of $700,000, they can do that. And it's the finance committee job to make a recommendation to the town as to what to do at that moment in time. No different than what happens all the time. It's the same as if the selectmen approve a budget for the police department of $1,100,000. It still has to, and that's forwarded to the finance committee. It still goes to town meeting with a recommendation or the finance committee is going to send it to town meeting with its recommendation.
Adam, let me ask you another question about the May 1st figures, dates we've been talking about.
Yep.
You said that
Yep.
for all of the current school choice students, they have to let the town know by May 1st whether they intend to come back for next year. For students who may be additional students, do you have a sense of when our school department usually has a pretty good understanding of how many that will be? Is it in May? Is it in August?
Yeah, I mean, I trust me, I hate saying this. In a normal year, yes, we probably would have some sense as to when we could expect X amount of school choice kids to commit to Granby. In a year like this, because we don't know what the fall looks like, and they may be at schools that are already back to 100% like in-person learning, and they may not want to leave there until they know what Granby's going to do. Again, I know it's not the answer, but we don't know. There's just so much left to know for the rest of this year to even think about next year. I couldn't even say, give you an approximate amount on new kids that we would expect to come.
Have applications started to come in from additional students?
Yes. Yep. The application process is open. I can, I'm not sure off the top of my head how many new applicants we have, but it's certainly something I could get.
Okay. Anybody else have any additional questions?
Is part of this, we want that chart that I gave you filled out?
The chart that,
The balances and the offsets and the like.
Yeah, you wanted to know specifically, from my understanding, what the offsets were, but you wanted them broken out, not bundled from our meeting last night. So if part of it's from COVID, part of it's from this or that. And then Bob, you had a specific question regarding the revenue being broken out.
Yeah.
I have all that, so I can certainly get that to you guys.
You see, one of the things that in looking at this budget overall, going back to the budget we approved this year, we used to 200 and I went back after the final cherry sheets or the final budget was done and all the numbers became firm, and came to the conclusion, working the numbers, that in round numbers, the town funded the school budget with a little over $300,000 of money in excess of net school spending. If you play that into this number, there it's 700,000, but it's really not 700,000 because there's still 105 up above over net school spending. So it's really like 850. So that the gap from against this year's budget is $550,000. Last year's budget was balanced on what went to town meeting by using just shy of $2 million of offset money. And that number is, as you can see, it's substantially lower this year. And to my way of thinking, the real difference in this budget is the lack of offsets that we've had last year, and I think even the year before. And I want to be sure that we're not funding a surplus to be used at some point in the future. I won't say I want to be that. I want to be aware if that's what's happening.
So I can tell you that's certainly not what's happening, especially this year. You know, in spite of the COVID money that we've received, and it was only for, at least for FY21, it was only about $260,000. I don't know it off the top of my head. You know, we've had costs. You know, we've had costs. You know, COVID costs that exceed that amount, and we're, you know, the small savings or carryover that we've had for school choice or for circuit breaker, like we're going to have to tap into that this year, and it's costs directly related to COVID and directly related to us getting the schools up and functional. But we certainly, unless I'm missing something, and I don't think I do, I don't think I am, like we certainly don't have any savings or any surplus that I'm trying to hide and use, you know, without anybody knowing. I wish that was the case, but that's certainly not. And I wanted to bring this up last night. And again, I know you guys know it was crazy last night. There was a lot going on, but I'm not sure if everyone remembered, but last year at town meeting floor, like the school department gave back $250,000 of transportation money. Like myself and two other towns who were on the first student contract negotiated set rates during COVID because they wanted us to pay the whole contract last year, even though their buses weren't operating. We negotiated a contract, saved the town on the last year of the contract $250,000. I gave that amount to Chris and the finance board real early on. We turned that money over last spring, and again this year I'm projecting to save a little over $200,000, right around there, that I'm going to give back to the town. So I'm going to sound a little frustrated because I don't like the notion that John said last night that we have these pockets of savings in school choice and circuit breaker, which we don't. I don't like to hear the notion that we have a surplus on the operating budget that we don't. And at the same time, I'm trying to save, and I did save the town transportation money that we gave back to the town and never asked for the money back. So it's kind of frustrating to hear that, you know, there's a notion out there that we have some surplus that we're trying to hide, when I'm working pretty hard to give whatever excess money we have back to the town, and then we hear that the 305 is not 305, it's 205, and the 205 is not 205, it's 105, and that deficit just keeps climbing. So I apologize. I know it's a group thing, but it's frustrating to hear that from any department in the town.
Well, let me give.
And we'd still like to, I think we're going to ask for you to give us how much money is in the various accounts that you have. We need to know that, to see how that looks.
Hey, Adam, this is Rick.
Yeah. Yep.
Could I just ask a question regarding this past year and our expenses, with schools were closed for a good portion of the year. Is that right?
Yeah, for the most part. Yep.
So I would imagine our facilities expenses associated with running the schools would have been below the budgeted amounts, because none of us would have probably expected last spring, when we were building the budget for this year, that the schools would be closed. So I would imagine that like heat and utilities and custodial services, things like that, would have been reduced over what was budgeted. What was the savings from that?
So you're right. A big part of I'm going to call it savings in this statement. So a big part of our savings is in the plant operations and facilities. I'm working on those projections right now. Like, we just filled up all 3 oil tanks between the high school and East Meadow. So I'm in the middle of projecting what those savings are. However, once school did start, we had we only have 2 nurses, 1 at each building, and then we have like a head nurse who 80% of her job is nursing duty and the other 20% is administrative. So she's not a full-time nurse. So we had to hire substitute nurses at each of the schools to handle the increase of kids coming to the nurse's office when they had COVID-like symptoms. So a lot of the savings that we might have realized in facilities and operations, we're going to have to use them to fund the costs that exceeded even the COVID ESSER money that we received. So we certainly have savings, but we're going to have to reallocate that money to pay for other, COVID related expenses that we needed to put in place in order for the schools to open.
So
It makes
how hard
perfect sense, but it makes perfect sense. But understanding that, we saved $200,000 in facility costs because we weren't running heat or whatever, and we hired, 2 nurses for $100,000. And again, I'm just using numbers for the sake of numbers, not that they're accurate or founded in any fact. It would be good to understand that relative to a year-over-year change. So if that's a question we could get answered, Bob, in your notes, that would be helpful.
Maybe you better send me that question.
Okay, Bob, I can do that.
So Rich, I understand that question, but again, comparing this year to last year is it's not apples to apples, right? So I don't know how much value you're going to get out of that. I can certainly give you that information, but comparing operations this year to operations last school year it wouldn't be the same.
But if you budgeted, let's just say you budgeted $100,000 for oil and only spent 50. That is, a tangible number, right? Because you budgeted each of these expenses, right?
Yes. Yep.
Let me
It's
rephrase
just
this
budget
another-
versus expense.
Let me rephrase
Okay,
it.
I thought you were trying to just compare. Okay, so you essentially just budgeted to what is actually spent for this year. Maybe I misunderstood what you were asking for.
Exactly.
I can certainly do that. Okay,
Right.
yeah, certainly.
That's all.
Okay, yeah, the way I interpreted that is that if you could get us, if you're going to be making projections for the school year end, if you can give us projections for the variances in the budget, the pluses and the minuses, the big budget items for which there are surplus or deficits, and then other budget items, same thing. I think that's basically what we'd be looking at. And then it would net out to something or another. Our suspicion is that it would net out to some savings, maybe small, but some savings, but to see the variances in the major categories of budget items.
I do that on a monthly basis. I would say up until now, those projections probably aren't the greatest, but now March, April through the end of the year, the projections are pretty close. So I can certainly provide you guys with that information. But again, I just want to caution that any savings that we would have had in our general operating budget, again, most of that's going to come from facilities and operations. We're going to need to use some of that to cover some of the COVID costs that the ESSER money and the COVID money, the grant money we got from the state didn't cost, because, we had to buy a lot of PPEs. I mean, we were, the school department was responsible for providing the bus companies, both our regular ed and special education buses, with masks if kids didn't have it. So there was a lot of PPE, cleaning, COVID costs that, the money that the state and the federal government allotted us just didn't cover all of our costs. So yes, we do have savings, but that savings is going to be reallocated and used in other places. But I can certainly send that information to you guys.
Yeah, we wouldn't be asking for just the positive variances. We'd be asking for all the variances, both positive and negative. So that would take care of your observation that money has to go into some of the other buckets because of special circumstances arose because of COVID. So,
and the other thing, and we touched on it last night, but we're in the middle of negotiations for 4 of our unions. So for the teachers, the custodians, the pairs, and our administrative assistants. So, I have projections built into the budget for FY22. But depending on how negotiations go, that deficit could either increase or decrease. So there's still a few unknowns there, in this year, actually in 21 and for 22.
all right, we won't ask any questions about that. We'll just be for the variances of the current year budget. Not.
Yep.
We don't want to get into stuff you're negotiating. We're not going to do that. One more.
I'm still talking.
Okay.
I got Adam's dander up on the hidden money issue. But let me tell you where I'm coming from, Adam. On July 5th, a year ago, you sent us over a recap of the budget showing that you were using just shy of $2 million of offset money. And on the same day, sent us an estimate of what you were receiving in for this year of $1,650,000. So there's just about $350,000 unaccounted for. And if you didn't have a kitty, I don't know how you're going to get through the year. So that's going to be one of the questions you can answer. I've got one more thing. There's been a lot of talk about COVID costs. Is there any information available, and it would probably have to come from Chris, as to how much money out of the $1.8 million or thereabouts that the town is going to receive out of this last stimulus bill is coming to the town, and some of it can be used for COVID-related expenses. I don't know whether it's expenses in the future after the date of the act, whether it's expenses over the past year, but that may be a source of, certainly if it's for the future and it comes in on a timely basis, it would serve to reduce some of the needs for the operating budget. That might solve the current year problem. Obviously, on a long-term basis, it isn't going to be there, so it doesn't solve the overall long-term problem.
I have a question about.
And like I said last night, we have a third round of stimulus coming too. There's not much talk out there about what the amounts are yet. Again, based on what they did say, based on Title I formula and what that means to Granby, I would say it may be around $500,000 to $600,000. And although they say that there's really no restrictions on how you use it, as long as you're using it to get schools back up and running, using that to offset our operating budget just delays this conversation for another year or two. So, and I know you guys understand that, and I just want to put that out there. Like, there is more revenue coming, but in the amount, it might be able to solve our deficit, but in theory, it shouldn't solve our deficit. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that.
I agree. Kicking the can is never a good way to go forward, because we're going to deal with this, cross this bridge tomorrow or a year from now. So you better deal with it now.
And Bob, to your point last year about the revenue and projected. So, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm still cleaning up stuff from when TMS was here, when I got here in July of 2018, when they ended. I'm still cleaning up stuff from them. And fortunately or unfortunately, due to their poor financial management and practices, like we did when I got here, I did find some savings in circuit breaker and school choice that they thought they had allocated, but they didn't. And, when Chris and I started talking, we had a pretty large number of school choice savings. So over the last few years, I've been trying to use that to help offset our budget so we didn't have to come to the town for any additional money. Unfortunately, I've kind of run out of that. Unfortunately, that money should have been used to help the budget, even before I got here. But, I'm still finding some things that like TMS did that I'm scratching my head on how they got here and all that. So you're 100% right. There was, our base revenue that we get yearly, and then there was an extra $250,000-$300,000 that I baked into that. But it was because of, poor financial management from TMS and me just trying to use that money to help the town out for a year or two. So you're 100% right, but it's, I don't build the budget, so we're trying to save $250,000-$300,000 every year. That's not the way I'm going to operate.
Oh, yeah. You notice this year on our free cash calculation, we didn't have all sorts of deductions because of overdrawn accounts, which we had earlier.
I don't know how TMS operated, but I don't know how they got away with not spending. So circuit breaker, case in point, circuit breaker, if you don't use the amount that you were allocated the year prior, so you were allocated $200,000. If you don't use that amount the next year, that money goes back to the revenue department. Like you don't get to keep that money. So the amount of money that they were giving back over how many years, I don't even know what that was, but it was just total mismanagement. And again, the last couple of years, I tried to clean that up and tried to use whatever money we could to help the town and help offset the budget on our own, but we're just not at that place anymore.
I hope this will be one last question. Could you get us we haven't seen anything from the budget yet. Chris is still putting final touches on his version of it. Could you get us information on the capital requests that the schools are making for next year? We'll put that in.
I can give you the details, but I can tell you what they are off the top of my head. So we're asking for a new to replace one of our maintenance trucks. One of our maintenance trucks is about 15, 16 years old. It's getting bad. We had the gas tank fall off in the middle of a snowstorm this year. We had the plow break down in the middle of a snowstorm this year. So I don't want to start pouring costs into a 15, 16-year-old truck. So we have that on on there. We have a $5-point-something million HVAC update, retrofit, whatever we want to call it, to the high school in capital costs. And we have, it's close to 600,000, maybe 550,000 of, and it's going to be done in, well, we propose it to be done in 3 phases, a complete gymnasium renovation. So I can get you the details of all that.
Okay, thank you. We'll include that in the questions. Thank you. Anybody else?
You will or you won't, because I'm going to be honest with you. I'll probably forget after I told you all that. So if you could include that in the questions, that'd be great.
We'll include it in questions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I got one more question. The override money, the 300,000 went to 200,000 and now it's at 100,000. When did that?
Correct. So it was 305 last year. It was just 205, and now this year, and this is something we didn't talk about last night, but I had talked to Chris when I started developing the budget a few months ago, and I said, hey, what are we looking at for the override? Like, I know they reduced it last year, and he said, from what he had heard, this was 2 months ago, that it sounded like we were only going to get 105 this year. So that's why it was included in our budget as only 105.
And that came from Chris?
That estimate, yes, came from Chris. Correct. Don't hold me or him to that number. You know what I'm saying? Like, he gave me that number. He wasn't sure that was what the number would be, but he said that is most likely what the number will be for this year. So that's why I included it in our budget.
So that's something the town has to decide?
I don't think so. So
No,
John,
it's only a part of a mathematical calculation as to how much the town appropriates to the school department.
That was always just in there because of the vote that was taken for a specific amount of money. But when it's not identified separately in the budget, it's just in the budget buildup. All these pieces of information are separate. On town, we just vote them a sum of money. So the question is, how do you think of that sum of money as being built up? And some of it comes from can be thought of as coming from override money, although the override money is just part of the town's income right now. And where does the rest of it come from? Well, does it come from taxes or does it come from fees? In some ways, it really doesn't make any difference. What you're looking at is the total amount of money to be allocated to the schools.
And I've at least since I've been here this is my third year now, it's always been talked about separately, even though I know it was really only separate when the vote was passed years ago. And then after that, it's just a sum. But for me, it was just always talked about separately. We always kind of addressed it separately. So we just include it separately on the budget, but it is just a part of the sum that the town gives us.
This is up for discussion, Scott, as it is every year.
Okay.
Anybody have anything else? I want to thank everybody
Nothing
for
here.
patience 2 nights in a row for going through this, and we haven't even got the budget yet. So what I'm going to propose to Chris is that when we get the budget, I'm not sure when that will be. In past years, I've sat down with him myself and gone through, and it's taken 2 or 3 hours to go through a lot of the details. And rather than have him come and talk to the whole committee about that, I've done it. This year, may ask myself and Bob to do that, to go through it, because time is so short this year compared to the past years. And then we'll have to get back together with the committee, and that'll take some other large amount of time to go through all that, as it always has in the past. But in particular,
I had a quick conversation with Chris today, and what he's going to do is he's going to send me the template that he uses to present his budget to you guys, to the finance board. And I told him I'll try to. So obviously we're on the same page, and you guys are kind of looking at pretty similar layouts. I'll try to put our information. I don't know about this year, but going forward, I'll try to put our information into Chris's layout, so we have some uniformity around the town budgets and the school budgets. I'll try to do the best I can to make it as consistent as possible. So when you guys are looking at it, although obviously the information is going to be different, the format will hopefully be as close as possible. And I'm assuming what Chris gives you fits your guys' need. So it just makes sense for me to try to put our information into that template, just to kind of keep everything clean and consistent for you guys.
Okay. Anybody have anything else? All right. Thank you very much. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So